400 hours. Two Russian Su-27 flankers raced just 50 feet above the Baltic Sea, using sea clutter to mask their approach as they closed in on the German warship Hessen in a fast, ultra-low strike profile. High above them, at 23,600 feet, a Su-30SM carrying Kash-31P Krypton anti-radiation missiles held a commanding position over the battle space. The moment Hessen switched on its fire control radar to track the sea-skimming jets, the Ka-31P's seeker could lock onto that emission and dive at speeds approaching Mach 3.5. The destroyer faced a punishing choice: stay blind to the incoming threat or reveal itself to immediate danger from above. But Moscow missed one critical factor. At 30,000 feet, a hunter was already in place, and this provocation might come at a far higher cost than expected: 0402 hours. Long before the Russian jets dropped toward the sea, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon was already listening. First came the older Su-27 radar signature. Seconds later, a more advanced signal appeared, the kind associated with the Su-30SM. By comparing those signal patterns, the onboard system quickly identified the formation: two Su-27s and one Su-30SM. Using the strength and direction of the emissions, the P-8A calculated their point of origin. The trace led directly back to Chkalovsk Air Base. The Russian aircraft were still on the ground. Without making a single radio call, the crew flagged the formation as a potential threat inside the system. A digital track was created, mapping speed, heading, and probable flight path. That information was immediately relayed by satellite to other NATO units in the region. By the time the Russian jets actually lifted off, their movement was already being tracked in real time: 0415 hours, 120 nautical miles. As the Russian formation took off and climbed to cruising altitude, the tactical picture began to change. The P-8A Poseidon shifted from passive surveillance to active battle management. Its objective was clear: integrate the German frigate Hessen, patrolling 120 nautical miles to the northwest, into the U.S. Navy's Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air architecture. The Saxon-class air defense frigate carried the powerful SMART-L and APAR radar suites. But standard doctrine dictated that activating those sensors would expose the ship's exact position to enemy radar warning receivers and electronic intelligence systems. To preserve surprise and retain the tactical edge, Hessen had to remain in MCON Alpha, complete electronic silence. 0416 hours. The P-8A established a Link 16 tactical data exchange with Hessen, a secure, jam-resistant, high-speed digital network operating in the UHF band. Through it, the Poseidon began feeding sensor data directly into the frigate's combat direction system. The process was technical, fast, and precise. The P-8A transmitted remote tracks, J3.2 air track messages, to the German ship. Inside Hessen's Combat Information Center, symbols representing the two Su-27S and the Su-30SM appeared on the screens. These tracks were not generated by the ship's own sensors, which remained in standby. They were ghost tracks, provided entirely by the American aircraft. Even more importantly, Hessen's fire control computers could accept that external data as valid firing solutions. That capability changed everything. The ship was no longer limited by its own radar horizon, which at low altitude was only about 20 to 30 nautical miles. Instead, it could engage targets at the maximum range of its interceptors, guided by the sensors of a P-8A flying 30,000 feet above the curve of the Earth. The integration was seamless. The Poseidon had effectively taken command of the German frigate's weapons picture, turning the NATO warship into a remote magazine for American targeting data. 0425 hours, 40 nautical miles. As the Russian formation neared the engagement zone, its tactical intent became unmistakable. The formation split. The two Su-27 flankers dropped rapidly to just 200 feet above sea level, entering the sea clutter layer. The move was designed to hide their approach inside the radar reflections of the waves below. Their course cut across Hessen's bow, suggesting a high-speed intimidation pass. At the same time, the Su-30SM pulled into a zoom climb to 26,000 feet. The P-8A's electronic support measures suite detected activation of the Su-30SM's master arms systems, along with the specific seeker cooling cycle linked to KH-31P Krypton anti-radiation missiles. The KH-31P was built to home in on S-band and X-band radar energy. The Russian plan depended on one key reaction. Hessen would see the low-flying flankers, activate its APAR fire control radar, and in that instant give the KH-31P seekers exactly what they needed. Once the German radar began radiating, the missiles could lock onto the signal and ride it straight down to the ship at Mach 3.5. But the American intervention broke that chain. The P-8A crew analyzed the Russian missile launch window and confirmed a crucial detail. As long as Hessen stayed silent, the KH-31Ps were effectively useless. They could not lock onto empty space. A Link 16 command was transmitted: hold fire, maintain silence. On board Hessen, the German tactical action officers followed the protocol. The frigate's radars stayed cold. But on the forward deck, the RIM-116 rolling airframe missile launcher came alive. Unlike the KH-31P, the RAM used a passive dual-mode seeker combining radio frequency and infrared guidance. Using the remote tracking data from the P-8A, Hessen's weapon system slewed the RAM launcher to the exact azimuth and elevation of the incoming low-level Su-27S. The launcher was now fully slaved to the Poseidon's track data. The missile's infrared seekers began scanning the assigned pocket of airspace, searching for the heat signature of the flanker's Lyulka AL-31F engines. The geometry was now set. The Russian aircraft were flying directly into a firing solution their own systems could not detect, because no radar emission warned them it was there. 0428 hours. A second asset joined the tactical network. An EA-18G Growler, operating from a carrier strike group in the North Sea, arrived on station overhead. The EA-18G was the U.S. Navy's primary airborne electronic attack platform, equipped with the AN/ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods and the AN/ALQ-218V2 receiver suite. Unlike the P-8A, which had been listening silently, the Growler was built to project electromagnetic pressure across the battlespace. In the rear cockpit, the electronic warfare officer initiated an active denial profile. The ALQ-218 receiver began analyzing the exact waveforms and frequency hopping patterns of the Su-30SM's BARS radar, along with the Su-27's data links. Once those frequencies were mapped and confirmed, the ALQ-99 pods were queued to transmit. The Growler used a method known as targeted spot jamming. Instead of blanketing the entire spectrum with noise, a tactic that demands enormous power, the ALQ-99 focused a narrow, high-gain beam of energy directly at the Russian aircraft's antennas. The jamming signal was tuned to match the enemy's frequency exactly, but transmitted at far greater power. The effect on the Su-30SM's avionics was immediate. Its BARS radar receiver became saturated. The signal-to-noise ratio dropped below the level needed for reliable target discrimination. Inside the cockpit, the radar display bloomed into useless clutter, leaving the crew unable to resolve targets or build a usable terrain picture. At the same time, the Growler targeted the KDL-79 data link used for communication between the Russian aircraft. With that digital connection disrupted, each jet was effectively isolated, unable to share targeting data or coordinate maneuvers in real time. For the low-flying Su-27s, the electronic attack showed up in a different way. The Growler injected false target generation effects into their radar warning receivers. Their systems were suddenly forced to process thousands of high-priority threat cues at once. The overload triggered non-stop chaotic audio and visual warnings, sharply reducing the pilot's ability to monitor their aircraft during a critical low-altitude run. In less than a minute, the U.S. Navy had effectively blinded the formation and filled their headsets with digital confusion. 0429 hours. The tactical picture for the Russian formation collapsed from an offensive setup into a fight for survival in under 60 seconds. The Su-30SM at altitude functioned as the formation leader, but its situational awareness had been stripped away. The pilot attempted to switch radar modes from scan to track, but the EA-18G's jamming followed the frequency shift instantly, keeping the receivers saturated. Without a clean radar picture, the KH-31P missiles could not be assigned a valid target, and the launch sequence could not proceed. Below, the Su-27 ASE pushed closer to visual range of Hessen. At 5 nautical miles, the P-8A increased target track updates to weapons quality precision, with latency measured in milliseconds. On the German frigate, the ram launcher made tiny adjustments, holding a perfect lead pursuit angle. Even though Hessen did not fire, the electronic signature of the encounter was unmistakable to the Russian crews. The steady collapse of their avionics made it clear they were facing a far more capable electronic warfare system. Their burn-through range, the distance at which radar power can overcome jamming, had been reduced to nearly zero. The formation was now operating as if flying through cloud with failing instruments. At that point, both the technical and human threshold for mission abort had been reached. The Su-30SM transmitted a recall signal over a backup, unencrypted VHF guard frequency, the only channel the Growler was not actively disrupting. The flight lead rolled into a hard turn away from the target line, banking east toward Kaliningrad airspace. The low-flying Su-27 saw the abort and, already dealing with major avionics degradation, broke away as well. They lit afterburners, accelerated out of the engagement zone, and climbed sharply to escape the sea clutter layer. The maneuver was captured by Hessen's electro-optical sensors and by the P-8A's radar. The ram launcher continued tracking the retreating aircraft until they passed beyond the engagement envelope, then returned to its stowed position. The trap was over. 0435 hours. As the Russian aircraft withdrew beyond the 50 nautical mile buffer, the EA-18G Growler ceased its jamming transmission. The P-8A Poseidon remained on station, shifting from battle management back to intelligence collection. The encounter had produced terabytes of valuable electronic intelligence. During the event, the P-8A's ALQ-240 system recorded the exact frequency hopping algorithms the Russian radars attempted to use in order to break the jamming. It captured rarely seen war reserve modes of the BAR's radar, settings normally avoided in order to keep them from being studied by NATO. By forcing the Russian systems to react to both jamming and silent targeting, the US Navy pushed the adversary into revealing key electronic countermeasure behavior. The data collected included the precise response times of Russian radar warning receivers, the power limits of their transmitters, and the spectral signatures of their inter-flight data links. That information was processed on board the P-8A and sent to the National Security Agency and the Office of Naval Intelligence for immediate analysis. It would be used to update threat libraries across US and NATO platforms, making the jamming profiles used by the EA-18G even more effective in future encounters. Hessen transmitted a situation normal report via Link 16. The German ship had never needed to reveal its position or expend any ordnance. The entire defense had been digital, coordinated through the standoff capabilities of the US Navy. The operation validated a core principle of modern American naval doctrine: spectrum dominance. The outcome was decided not by direct fire, but by control of information, by shaping what the enemy could see, hear, and understand, and by linking allied platforms into a single, unified combat web. The P-8A and EA-18G neutralized a dangerous hunter-killer team without a single missile leaving the rail.